Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where you are joining us from here today. Thank you so much for your interest here in Jamf Now. Just a quick housekeeping. We'll be going through the entire presentation today, so we'll be sure to have some time to answer some questions towards the end of the presentation. So as we go through some of these topics, you are welcome to type up your question right within the chat or Q&A section of WebEx, and we'll be sure to get to those questions at the end of the presentation. For those of you that are dialed in, please keep in mind that you can dial in using the information that we have here up on the screen. We will also be recording today's session, and we will be sending it out to everyone that's registered as well as that has joined us today. So no worries if you missed something. You can always re-watch towards that recording. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. So today we're going to be talking about all the steps you need to take to set up Jamf Now to help set you up for success for your deployment. My name is Veronica. I'm the Global Business Development Manager for Jamf Now, and I'll be taking you through today's presentation. Just a quick overview of our agenda. We'll be talking a little bit about Jamf, our background and history. We'll also be taking a quick overview towards MDM. So those of you that are new to MDM, you can get that quick overview. Again, please dial in. If you haven't already, I'll be typing that up in the chat section here so you can listen in. Perfect. Once we talk through the MDM overview, we'll talk through Apple's deployment program. For those of you that have spent some time in Jamf Now, you'll notice DEP and VPP. So we'll talk through the benefits of those and how to set those up. Then we'll go through the sign-up process and the setup process as well. So for those of you that don't know much about Jamf, we've been around since 2002. So we've been in the device management realm for quite some time. We do offer two solutions here at Jamf. Today we'll be talking about our small to medium business solution Jamf Now, which is really meant to simplify this idea of device management. For those folks that grow into larger organizations, we do offer an enterprise solution in Jamf Pro. But to give you a little bit of background on Jamf, our goal is to help organizations succeed with Apple. And so we focus specifically on the Apple platform. With Jamf Now, you can manage Apple devices from iPhone to iPad to the Mac, as well as the iPod. And so the reason we offer that is we want to help deliver the best experience for folks managing devices, as well as for your employees. And so we want to make sure that that experience that you have at home as a consumer, you can also have here within your businesses. And so for those of you that don't know, Jamf is really happy to offer something called 0-day support. And what that means is that when Apple releases a new operating system, you can depend on both Jamf Now and Jamf Pro being compatible with those updates on the day that they're released from Apple. And so you don't have to worry about any compatibility issues. We'll be here to make sure that you can keep your business running whenever those changes come from Apple. Now, for those of you that are new to MDM or mobile device management, this is a quick overview as to what the life cycle of a device can look like. Just a quick reminder, we'll be going through all of your questions at the end of the presentation, so please hang tight and we'll be sure to get those questions answered. But when it comes to the life cycle device management, the first thing that happens is deployment, right? How do we get these devices in the hands of our employees, and how do we get them linked up to Jamf Now? We'll talk about the different methods that you have available with Jamf Now. But once a device is in Jamf Now, we'll be able to collect inventory data on that device. So for those of you that are managing your inventory on an Excel spreadsheet, there is a better way. Jamf Now can help you manage things like serial number, operating systems, and capacity, and you can keep all of that information up to date as devices check in with Jamf every 24 hours. So you'll have a pretty good idea as to what the status of your inventory is. No more ambiguity around how many devices you actually have. Past that, the next part of it is configuring the devices. And the nice thing about MDM is that it's able to push all of your settings over the air. So when you think about configuring email accounts, Wi-Fi passwords, those are all things that we can help you get on devices via blueprints in Jamf Now, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. But once everything is set up, sometimes there are issues that happen where maybe you misplaced the device or you need to remove a passcode if a user forgets it. This is where we come to our management commands. We'll talk a little bit about what's possible here in Jamf Now, but you can do things like unlock the device if we've forgotten a passcode. For those of us leveraging the device enrollment program, we always have the ability to track a lost or stolen device via lost mode. Those are some examples of management commands that are available. The next one is around app distribution, and we'll get into this in some detail. But of course, for those of you leveraging iPads, iPhones, Macs, and you want to get apps on those devices, typically what we're used to is needing an Apple ID and being able to download those apps individually on each device. There is, of course, a more streamlined way to do that through Apple's volume purchase program. And so we're able to push applications either to someone's personal Apple ID or to the device itself if you're in a shared use environment. And again, we'll talk a little bit more about that, but we want to help you enable your employees to be more successful and more productive with all the work apps that they need on those devices. The last one, and we want to make sure that you have your devices secure all the way throughout. And so that can be down to adding a passcode policy, enforcing encryption on your Mac, as well as having a plan if the device is ever lost or stolen. So for those of you that are holding strict compliances, maybe in the healthcare industry with HIPAA, we want to make sure that those devices stay secure. And if a device is ever lost or stolen, you can always remove the data by using a remote wipe command. Perfect. And again, we'll be answering any of your questions towards the end of the presentation here. But today, we're going to focus all of our efforts on Jamf Now. We're going to walk you through that setup process. And again, Jamf Now was built for small to medium businesses where the primary user might not be an IT person. For those of you that don't have an IT team internally, Jamf Now is meant to simplify all of that complicated stuff that we usually hear about IT and make it super simple. So if you're a business owner or an office administrator, you don't have to worry about your technology as much, and you can focus all of your efforts on growing your business. And so let's talk a little bit about Apple deployment programs, what they are and what their benefits are. The two that we integrate with here in Jamf Now are Apple's Device Enrollment Program, often referred to as DEP, and Apple's Volume Purchase Program, often referred to as VPP. So when it comes to those benefits, what the Device Enrollment Program grants you is automated enrollment for one. That way you can buy a new device from your vendor, ship it off to a new employee, and when they open the box and connect to Wi-Fi, Jamf Now will take over and automatically configure that device for you. So there's nothing you need to do as an administrator of the technology to get those devices linked to Jamf. It kind of happens on its own. The next thing you get with the Device Enrollment Program is automated and wireless supervision. We're going to talk in detail about supervision, but just to give you an idea, supervision simply means that Apple will recognize the device as corporate owned. It belongs to Jamf, not to Veronica, and so it unlocks an additional layer of management capability. And you'll see throughout Jamf Now that there are some settings that require supervision, as well as some remote commands that require supervision. So if you're in the first stages of your deployment, I'd highly recommend connecting with your vendor or applying for DEP, and we'll talk through those steps in just a moment. The very last thing that DEP grants you is a non-removable MDM profile. This is great because no matter how tech-savvy your users are, even if they find that what we call a profile on the device itself, they'll never be able to remove it. You know, these devices are considered corporate owned, and so you'll always have visibility into those devices. Even if I reset a DEP device, when it comes back online, it's just going to kick back into this automated enrollment and re-enroll itself into Jamf Now. It's really a beautiful thing and a best practice to make sure that, again, you don't have to worry too much about your technology. If you set everything up in Jamf, it kind of takes care of itself. Just a quick reminder, I can see some questions coming in here. Just want to make sure that everyone was able to dial in using that call-in information. Again, we'll be recording today's session, so if anybody missed anything, no worries. We'll be sure to send it off to everyone that's here and that has registered. On to the volume purchase program. You know, the most common question that I ask customers is, what is your Apple ID strategy? You know, what is your plan for getting apps on devices? And many times folks will tell us that they're using one Apple ID across a range of devices. And of course, they then run into synchronization issues where I see someone else's text messages if I'm logged into that same Apple ID. So that's not the best way of doing things. The other common thing we hear is, hey, let's just go ahead and create an Apple ID per device, like iPad 1 at company.com. At that point, you're managing Apple IDs and passwords. And so folks will still have to come to you to type in that password if they want to update their apps. And so the solve to all of this to make your lives a little bit easier is VPP. What this allows you to do is purchase apps and maintain ownership over them as a business, so that if you're downloading paid apps, you always maintain ownership over them, and you're simply letting devices or employees borrow those apps for the time that they're with the company. So that's one great thing about it. You can, of course, maintain ownership over those apps and push them out with Jamf Now. We'll see how that works. The other benefit here is that VPP is the only way that we can get an app on devices without the need for an Apple ID at all. This is great for shared use environments. Maybe I'm at a hospital where we've got 10 nurses using the same iPad, and I don't want folks logging in with their personal iPad or having any sort of ambiguity around that. And so the volume purchase program makes sure that we can get apps on all of the devices without needing to associate an Apple ID. And we'll talk through how that works. Well, now the first step, again, just because we consider these best practices, if you haven't already, please, please, please apply for DEP and VPP. And so the first thing that you'll need is a DUNS number, a Dun & Bradstreet number. Most companies already have one. If you don't know whether or not you have one, this link right here will take you to that. At the end of the presentation, I'm going to go ahead and post these links in our chat section so you have them available to yourself. Now, you can always apply for a DUNS number at that same website. I believe it can take quite some time, about 30 days or so, to get that DUNS number, but you can always pay an expedite fee if you need it. The DUNS number is necessary to apply for both DEP and VPP. The next thing we'll need is an email address to associate these accounts with. Right? Typically, you'll need an email that is not a current Apple ID. So let's say you have your work email and you've created an Apple ID with that already. You will not be able to use that email for these deployment programs. So the best practice is to just create a unique email specific to these programs. This is beneficial. If you ever have a person leave the company and they're the ones managing DEP and VPP, if you create this group style email that isn't someone's personal email, then you can always get back in and pick up where they left off. So that's a best practice. You know, if you've already created your DEP accounts with a specific email, that's totally okay. The next thing you'll need is a customer number or a reseller ID from your vendor. If you're working directly with Apple, that'll reflect as a customer number. If you're working with a third-party vendor or a carrier, for example, they each have their unique reseller IDs, and you can, of course, partner with that vendor or carrier to get that ID for the application process. So be sure to communicate with your vendor so that they can help you through the setup process as well. The last thing is to actually apply, and you can do that at deploy.apple.com. Again, I'll be sure to add that to the chat section so you have it available. DEP takes a few days for approval, so just keep that in mind for your deployment timeline to make sure that you give it those days. VPP is typically an immediate approval, but of course things can happen, so just wanted to give you those disclaimers. Just a quick reminder, we'll get to those questions towards the end of the presentation there, but you are welcome to type them in as we go along so you don't forget them. The last thing I'd say is a quick warning is that if you are purchasing devices under the device enrollment program, our recommendation is to keep the devices in their boxes until you have Jamf Now set up. Let's say we have an iPad that we've taken out of the box and we've configured it. If it's not in Jamf Now, during those initial steps, we will have to wipe those devices clean to get them enrolled into Jamf Now under DEP. So the best practice is just keep those devices in their boxes. When we open them up, we'll make sure Jamf Now is set up and that it can configure everything that we need on them. Cool, so just one last warning, keep those devices in their boxes. Cool, now the next thing is of course to sign up for Jamf Now. If you haven't already, you can do that at signup.jamfcloud.com. We'd love to hear what industry you're in so we can give you specific recommendations based on that. We also would love to know how you heard about us, whether it was through your vendor, a friend, or just found us on a Google search. Please let us know. Now, when you sign up, you will receive an email from Jamf Now to activate your account. This is kind of what that looks like. You would just click here, and it'll take you right into Jamf Now. If you've already got an account and you want to follow along, feel free to go ahead and log in, and that way we can walk you through those steps in real time. Now, we recently released a Getting Started guide, which helps us through some of these setup steps that we'll be talking through today. Again, I'll be adding that to the chat section. That way, if you want to download a copy, you definitely can, and can help walk you through that at a later time if you can't follow along here today. But we'll be following the Getting Started guide here today. The first thing we'll talk about is Blueprints, which will cover all of your settings. Then we'll move on to Apps and the Volume Purchase Program. We'll talk a little bit about Apple's Push Notification Service, or APNs, as it's referred to. And the last step here is we'll talk about how to enroll those devices, right? How do we get them into Jamf Now once we have everything set up? We'll cover off on some support options here towards the end so you know exactly where you can get some help. Cool. Now, step one. When creating your blueprints, there are a few questions that you want to ask yourself. And this is the first one that we talked about a little bit earlier, is what is your Apple ID strategy, right? This will help us determine what sort of restrictions we might want on our devices. Ultimately, you want to ask yourself, am I going to allow some sort of personal use, or do I want this to be a strictly work-only device? This will help us determine which of those restrictions we want on or off. The next thing you want to do is decide on your number of use cases, right? How many different configurations will we have for the different types of folks that will be using these devices? That way you can curate the recipe of settings for each use case. So that definitely makes it a little bit easier as you get more and more devices and as your business grows. Keep in mind you can add as many blueprints as you like, so you can always change those down the line. Next thing is you want to think about security. We absolutely want everyone to keep their data secure, keep those devices secure if they're ever misplaced. So just give some thought as to whether or not you want those passcodes on there and how complex you might want them. Keep in mind that you always have the ability to unlock a device if it were ever misplaced, or for example, you don't have the password to it. So please keep that in mind. For our Mac users here today, we also want to think about File Vault, which is an encryption tool that's native to the Macs, and it's highly recommended. So that's an option that we'll look at today. Last thing kind of ties into that first question is what sort of restrictions do we want on here, right? What do we want our end users to be able to do on these devices? Maybe we have to set some boundaries, and so we can give it some thought before creating the blueprint. But we're actually going to hop right into a demonstration here. I've got my Jamf Now account. For those of you that don't have an account and maybe want to click through with us as we go through this, I'm heading to login.jamfcloud.com/demo. This will get us into a working demonstration. Cool. So this is our dashboard. You can see, I've already got my deployment up and running, but we're going to take a look at blueprints here. I've got a number of blueprints available to us. In this scenario, we've got 4. You can see that some are locked and some are not. All that means that this specific blueprint should only be available to the management team. And so I can either assign those for DEP devices. I can also share a specific link for those management folks that want to get enrolled. And this will make a little bit more sense once we get to the enrollment portion. But let's take a look at what we have available in our blueprint. You can see that I've got some apps added already. We're going to talk about that once we get to VPP here in a moment. For those of you that haven't been in the product in quite some time, we have added some new functionality. And so you do have the ability to add in what we call a web clip. This is simply a bookmark that lives like an app on the home screen. So rather than your users needing to go to Safari and typing out a website, you can just make it an app. So it's just one click. That's available for both Mac and iOS. Next thing we want to think about is our password requirements. So here are some options to make sure that folks don't use passwords like 1234 or the word password for our Macs. I can go in here and require some complexity as well as length. So if I wanted to give it a little bit more security, I can enforce that here through Jamf Now. We've also got some options here for auto lock as well as passcode ages. So depending on what makes sense for your business, you can go in here and make those changes accordingly. For our Mac users here, this is where I'd be able to enable File Vault, which allows us to keep that data secure down to the chip level of that Mac. So if you ever misplace one, you know that File Vault has protected our data. Highly recommended. Next thing we can do here is add our email server information. So we'll take Exchange as an example here today, but you see that we can pretty much add any type of email, IMAP or POP, for those of you that have custom servers. But for example, rather than needing to physically touch each device and configure those server settings, I can go in here and kind of apply global settings. That way, for those folks that need access to those email accounts, when they get their devices, all they need to know is their email and password. That way, you don't have to physically touch each device. So a nice way to streamline the setup process here. Next thing I can do is add my Wi-Fi networks. For those of you that have multiple offices, this is great. As long as you have this set to auto join, it'll simply connect to the network that it's within range of. So you can always add as many networks as you like, as little networks as you like, and the password is stored here. So on the device itself, it's really considered a remembered network. Now for our restrictions portion, this is really where you can curate that experience for your end users depending on how the device is being used. And so we implemented recent changes here to Jamf Now. This layout looks a little bit different. We've now changed them into categories for you, so it's a little bit easier to navigate. Next thing I'd say is about a few weeks ago, maybe a month ago, we added in 50 additional restrictions, which is huge. Tons of things that we can do now here in Jamf Now. But when we take a look, we're going to cover off on just a few topics here to make sure that you can kind of navigate these restrictions. I'll also share with you those definitions for each of those restrictions in the chat section here at the end of the presentation. So if you have a question on what something does, this article will help you decipher that. But for those of you that want to remove the App Store, this is where I'll be able to do that. Maybe I have a research facility and I want to remove the camera. I can go through here and disable some native apps as well. But you can see that we've got tons of restrictions depending on what all it is that you need to do. As we go down the line here, some security options. For those of you that have sensitive data coming in through your email account, just for example, I would encourage you to turn on this app data segregation. That way we can keep work data in work apps. And I, as an employee, for example, can't take a customer list from my work email and save it to a personal Dropbox app. Just one example. Cool. Some other things we can do here, for those of you in the healthcare industry, you probably want to go in and disable screenshots. That way no one can take a photo of any electronic medical records that we can see displayed on an iPad at any given time. So we've got tons of restrictions here. Some others that are recommended, you can disable the ability to enable restrictions. This is the parental restriction section of that iOS device. So if you wanted to, make sure no one can lock you out of certain things, that would be something that you can disable as well. But again, we've grown from 25 restrictions all the way to 75 total, so lots of things that you can customize here. I just want to take you through these last few options we have, just so you can see them listed out. But you've got some network options. So when it comes to Wi-Fi and VPN, you can disable some features. And for iCloud, let's say you go down the route of letting people use devices for personal use as well. Perhaps I want to disable certain document syncing so that my work data stays on that work device and it doesn't sync up to that personal Apple ID. Cool. Last few options here for those of you that have the need to disable Siri, maybe in an education environment, we can go ahead and disable that. And for those of you that want to prevent users from logging in with a personal Apple ID or perhaps adding a personal Gmail account to a work device, this is a setting you want to turn on. And so this will gray out the option to log in with an Apple ID or personalized device with any personal account. Great, so that's Blueprint. We're gonna head back into our keynote here and continue on with our setup process. The next thing that we wanna do is get our app all the way set up. And so this is assuming that you already got a VPP account. You can log into that VPP account at vpp.itunes.apple.com. You can also log in through your deploy.apple.com account. But once you've logged in, you can see here that I have the ability to search for my app. So I'm going to go ahead and search for our Jamf One app. This is our community application. It's totally free. For those of you that want to stay up to date on all Jamf things, you're welcome to download that from the App Store. But I've selected my app. Keep in mind that some apps are iPad specific. So depending on your deployment, it might give you a list of different types of devices. So just make sure you grab the one that you need for the devices that you have. Now, once I find the app that I want, I'm going to go ahead and purchase an amount. I am, quote unquote, purchasing apps, even though they're free. That's totally fine. What we want to do is just procure the number of licenses that we need. And once we do that, we can go ahead and place our order. We will get a notification to say that our order is complete. And you can do that for all the apps that you need. If down the line you need to buy a new app, it'll be the same exact process. As we move on here, just a quick reminder, we'll be sure to get to your questions towards the end of the presentation here, so hang tight. Cool. Next thing we want to do is link our VPP account to our Jamf Now account. And so we'll do that by clicking on our email account here at the top, and then we'll select Account Summary from that drop-down menu. What we'll end up doing is downloading the token that we see made available to us on managed distribution. Just a quick disclaimer, this file that's downloaded from VPP is not meant to be opened. So if you open it and try to read it, it'll look like a whole bunch of mumble jumble. And so just know where you saved it, because what we'll do is we'll take that token and we'll upload it right into VPP in Jamf Now. So we'll find our VPP section, we'll upload that token, and we'll take that same exact file we just got from VPP. Once we've done that, we want to make sure that we sync so that VPP gives Jamf Now those licenses, and you can do that by clicking the three dots at the top right of the corner. Here it'll say sync with Apple or sync apps, and then it'll pull in those apps for you. These will stay up to date for you. So if you ever see something as red, we go ahead and recommend going back into VPP and just getting a few more licenses so that someone isn't without an app if they need it. Cool. Once we've linked VPP to Jamf Now, then we can go back into our blueprint and add those apps that we need depending on that use case. So this is great because once the device is added to Jamf Now, those apps will simply start to download on those devices depending on the settings that you have. And since we're talking about settings, I want to quickly show you where you can customize those settings. If you're in Jamf Now, in your left-hand menu, you'll click Edit Settings, and then that'll expand. You'll click Apps down at the bottom. This will give you some setting options. Now, we talked a little bit about deploying an app directly to a device. For those of you that are in that scenario, we would want to check device-based app assignment. This means that no Apple ID is required. Keep in mind devices need to be running iOS 9 or 10.11 for those of you with Macs, or anything higher, of course. For those of you that go down the route of, hey, let's just let people use their personal Apple ID, you'll want to make sure that invite to VPP is checked. That way, when the app deploys, it'll assign it to that personal Apple ID. Keep in mind that that's temporary, right? We're just letting those folks borrow these apps. If they ever left the company, I can remove them from Jamf Now, and those licenses will come back into my app bucket so I can reassign it to a new user, right? No loss of software in that sense. Last thing about here is the automatic app update. For those of you that depend on apps being up to date for functionality, you can check the box here in Jamf Now. Whenever that new app version is made available in the App Store, Jamf Now will take care of updating it for you. So you don't have to depend on the end user to keep it up to date. Now, some best practices, if you're buying free apps, buying quote unquote, you can go ahead and purchase 5 or so more licenses than the amount of devices that you have, just to make sure that we don't get into that red area when we took a look at our app. Just as a buffer, you can use that as a best practice for any free app. Now you notice that in my example, I didn't have to select the type of distribution. Many apps these days default to manage distribution. There are some other legacy apps that will give you the option to download redeemable codes. That's not the route we want to go down. If you want to maintain ownership of those apps, remember to always select manage distribution. And then last thing, whenever you buy a new app, just remember to click sync in Jamf Now so Jamf can update that, those app licenses for you. Cool. So that's apps. We're going to go ahead and move on to the next section here, which is the Apple Push Notification Certificate. APNs is that little option on the left-hand menu of your Jamf Now account. Just a quick kind of overview of what APNs is and does. APNs is the way that any piece of software is able to communicate with Apple devices over the air. So if you think about getting an Apple News notification to your Apple Watch or an ESPN notification to your iPhone, all of that communication filters through APNs. And so this step is critical. You have to upload your APNs certificate prior to adding a device to Jamf Now. You won't be able to if you don't have one uploaded, so let's take a look at how we can do that. You'll head into the APNs section of Jamf Now right on the left-hand side here. The first step is to download the certificate signing request. Again, this is a file that does not need to be opened. Just remember where you saved it and click Next. The next step will include heading to Apple so that we can go ahead and link those accounts together. And so when you open the Push Certificates portal, it'll ask you to sign in with an Apple ID. You can use any Apple ID. The disclaimer here is that APNs needs to be updated once a year. So please remember which Apple ID you use, as if you try to use a new Apple ID the next year, it will unenroll all of your devices. So please keep note of which Apple ID you used. But when I log in, it looks like, because I've already created an APNs account, for those of you that are new to this portal, the only option you'll have here is to create a new certificate. So that's the option that we'll click on. Then, of course, there are terms of use here. We'll just click yes, I agree, and then hit accept. And this is where we'll take that .plist file that we downloaded from Jamf Now in the earlier step, and we'll go ahead and choose that file and upload it to Jamf Now. So remember where you did it. You can add a quick note just to make sure that if you're managing, multiple certificates, that you know exactly which one is where. And then we'll hit upload. Once you get that little green check, it means we're ready to head back into Jamf Now. Before you do that, though, make sure you click download, because we're going to take something from this portal to give back to Jamf Now. Again, no need to open it. But when we head back into Jamf Now, we'll hit next. And we'll take that file that we just got from Apple, drag it right into our browser here, and then hit next. Good. Once we get the little green check, that means we're ready to deploy. Now, for those of you that don't know exactly where to save that Apple ID information, you've got a field here where you can add it. So be sure to add that in. So come next year, we don't have any issues with enrollment. We can continue business as usual. Perfect. Now, the next step here is actually enrolling devices, right? We've added our apps, we've created our blueprints, we've added the Apple push certificate, and so the next part is actually getting devices into Jamf Now. The first step that we'll talk about is in relation to the device enrollment program. So this is assuming that you've already got a DEP account set up, that you've already purchased devices with your vendor linked to DEP. But these are the steps that we'll take to link our DEP account. So we'll head into the Jamf Now menu here. We'll click DEP and token, and it'll take us to this page here. We're going to, again, download a file from Jamf Now by clicking download. And again, no need to open this file. We're just going to give it to Apple. So once we do that, we're going to go to deploy.apple.com and log in with our account. The next thing we'll do is on our left-hand menu, we're going to click Manage Servers, and we're going to add an MDM server. To do that, you'll have to name that server. So for ease of use, you can go ahead and name it Jamf Now. Now, one quick disclaimer on this automatically assign new devices. If you have, if you plan to purchase new devices and you want those devices to automatically filter into Jamf Now as you order them, you can go ahead and check this box. That way you don't have to go through this process again. That is recommended if you only have one MDM provider. That way you don't need to filter those devices out. Cool. So if we've only got one thing, we can go ahead and check that box so that these devices automatically filter. Then we're going to take that file that we downloaded from Jamf, right, the one that has no reason to be opened. We're going to choose that file and upload it, hit next. And then DEP gives you another file that we're going to give back to Jamf Now. So before you hit done, please be sure to download your server token. If you hit done a little bit ahead of time, there might be another opportunity for you to download that token. But if you don't, we'd recommend for you to just remove this server that you just created and start again, just to make sure that those tokens match up. So be sure to hold tight before you hit done and download that server token. Remember, no need to open it. We're just going to save it in a place where you can find it easily. And then we'll head back into Jamf Now. We'll click upload, and we'll add that token that we just received. Cool. Now, there's one other step that we need to make sure we do prior to getting those devices into Jamf Now, and that's importing our device list in DEP to Jamf Now. So let's show you exactly what that looks like. As a pre-flight checklist, what you'll want to do is click on your name up at the top and find your organization details. You'll have all that information listed here, but you just want to make sure that you have your vendors as active to make sure that when you buy those devices, they're ready to be imported. That's just the pre-flight check. You know that it's there, no need to do that one. But what we'll do is we'll click on Manage Devices from our left-hand menu in deploy.apple.com. We'll actually select order number. This is a fun, neat trick for you. If you select order number and type in all available, it'll just look for all eligible devices for you. So once you do that, it'll give you the number of devices that are eligible, and then you can say, we're going to assign it to a server. My example here, we haven't uploaded one yet, but then you'll have another drop-down menu, and you can select Jamf Now to assign it to. You'll then hit Done, and those devices will show up for you under Jamf Now, DEP, and Devices. And that list of iPads, iPhones, or Macs that you've got will show up here for us. Well, if you don't have anything here and you've already completed the step prior to this, you can just click Sync DEP devices, and those devices will populate for you. Cool. Now, some last best practices that we have on the DEP side, there's a couple of settings that you can kind of add prior to the devices being turned on. If you have a most common use case from your blueprints that you know that most of your devices will probably fall under, you can go ahead and select a default blueprint under Edit Settings in our left-hand menu and Devices. That way you can select your most common use case. The reason I say that is if we go back into our devices list, you'll notice that there's a blueprint that has been assigned to each of the devices. If you set that default, then all of them will have that default, and then all you need to do is go in here and change the blueprint on a case-by-case basis. It just requires less clicks if you add that blueprint prior. Now, if you do need to change a blueprint, you just find your device, click Sign Blueprint, and you can go ahead and change it to a different one. Cool. Last thing I'd say here is for those of you that do have DEP, you can actually pre-assign devices prior to having them turn on. So I can say, hey, I know that this specific serial number is going to belong to Jane, and we'll take that one step further for those email accounts that we've added. That if you want to pre-populate Jane's email, this makes it easier for her because all she'll need to know is her password to get that email configured. So a nice way to pre-assign these devices. Well, just a quick reminder, we're going to get to these questions in just a few minutes. Now the last part here is actually getting devices into Jamf Now. We saw how we can get them via DEP. Once you have all those devices assigned and you've got the blueprints, you simply need to turn them on. And we're actually going to take you through a demonstration of that in just a second. But for those of you that are not leveraging Apple's device enrollment program, you would go through open enrollment. And this is simply a URL link that you would share with your end users. You can set up open enrollment in your left-hand menu here under open enrollment and then click settings. When you check the box, the menu will scan for you. A password is required for security reasons. That way, whenever a new user tries to add a device to your Jamf Now account, they will require that passcode, so just keep that in mind. We go ahead and recommend expiring until disabled. That way you don't run into open enrollment issues. And then depending on how strict your enrollment methods or workflow is, you can restrict to specific IP addresses, but what that means is no device will be able to enroll unless they are within this specific IP. So we recommend keeping it open unless you do have to follow specific compliances. Now what you'll do is you'll find your unique open enrollment link. This is not an actual enrollment link. For those of you that, that don't have an account yet, that enrollment link will show up for you when you create your account. So then you'll just have users navigate to that, that link in Safari. This is what open enrollment looks like for the end user. They'll type in that access code, they'll select that blueprint, and then they'll type in their name. If your blueprint has an email server added to it, it'll then open up a new field for them to add their email address. That way when they fully enroll, they just need to add that password. Cool, and then they'll click Start Enrollment, and it'll download that profile that we talked about a little bit earlier. So what we'll do is actually take a look at what that looks like. Yes, I am still here. Oh, let's just go ahead and log back in just in case. But I'm going to take my iPad here, and I just want to make sure that everyone can see this. It should just say hello up on the screen there. But this is a DEP-enabled device that I've turned on for the very first time. Right, I've already connected to Wi-Fi, so I'm on this app and data screen. But this is where the magic happens. When I hit Setup as New, this device checks in with Apple. Apple says, oh, you belong to Jamf. We're going to go ahead and automatically configure this device for you. And you'll notice that on the screen, the user really has no option but to hit next. So it'll start to communicate with Jamf to find the appropriate setting. And now it's starting to install my blueprint. Right, this is a great method to not have to touch each device. Remember, this is the automated enrollment benefit that DEP grants us outside of wireless supervision and the non-removable MD file. So I'm going to skip over some of these other settings, right? I'm going to skip over passcode. We'll see what happens in a little bit. I don't need an Apple ID, the shared use case, and so I'm just going to click the little, I'm going to go back for those of you that didn't see it, the little blue hyperlink there that says forgot password or don't have one. And then I'll say, yes, I'm sure. We'll set that up later in settings, no need. And these last few options here will just continue through. But when I get to the home screen, that iPad is going to look a little bit different than what we're used to. So I was able to add a wallpaper to my blueprint. It's already changed it for me in a moment. I'm going to lose some of my apps because I've got some harsh restrictions set up with this blueprint. And the last thing we'll see is a couple of apps start to come through. Right? A lot of this depends on your network. So depending on how open or how bogged down your Wi-Fi connection is, it might take a minute or two for those settings to come through. But we can always double check by going into settings. For all of you that don't, profile is going to live under general. And when I scroll down to the bottom, DEP has already added my profile. Oops. And it looks like now those settings have come through. So now I've got all of my restrictions set. But let me quickly finish off that demo here. You can see that my Apple ID has been locked out, so there's no way for me to log in. Some other settings have been removed as well. But here's that profile. So now I know that this device is enrolled in Jamf. I can even see what settings have been applied. But you'll notice that there really is no option for me to remove. That's the difference with open enrollment. If I would have open enrolled this device, there would be a remove option right over here. So that's the last benefit here to DEP, that profile is pretty much permanent. Now for our open enrollment users, again, we'll navigate to Safari there, and we'll head to our open enrollment link. And so your users will need that as they start to enroll the devices, or if I'm enrolling them, this is what that looks like. Whoop. And again, you saw that screenshot in my keynote just a little bit earlier. This looks exactly the same. Cool, and obviously my Wi-Fi is just a little today, but as that loads here, you'll see that pop up for us. All right, let me try to reload one more time, and if we can't get to it, no worries. We do have an entire support team that's available to you if you run into any issues over open enrollment. So if I head back into my keynote here, last thing I want to share with you are the resources that we discussed. The Support Center is available to you at all times. We've got excellent articles that can help walk you through some of these steps. Support.jamfnow.com. That's where our live chat team lives. So if you ever need any technical support, those folks are awesome. They're there to help you out. You can always email into support directly from your Jamf Now account as well. And there's that getting started guide that we discussed. So we're actually going to hop into the Q&A. So I'm going to take a look at our questions that we have here today. I'm going to start on the Q&A section. So for those of you that use chat, that's 1 second. So we had a question come in around, does Jamf Now also manage Apple TV? That's a great question. At the moment, our Jamf Pro solution can help you manage Apple TVs. So if you do have a specific set of requirements that you have there, you can always either request a trial or more information on Jamf Pro, jamf.com. Next question, if I have only a few 5 to 6 users on Mac, does one need to set DEP up just to be able to manage OS updates? Excellent question. Yeah, that's one thing that we didn't discuss. Thank you for the quick reminder. You can manage operating system updates, but that is only to DEP-enabled devices. So there's no minimum setting up DEP. I would recommend that if Mac OS updates is something that you need, that you go ahead and sign up for DEP to get those Mac DEP eligible. You do need DEP for Mac OS updates. We have a question coming in around Apple Business Manager. So for those of you that don't know, Apple recently released a new version of their deployment programs portal called Apple Business Manager. That's available at business.apple.com, I believe. But it is the exact same thing. You know, Apple Business Manager offers a few more options as to how you can manage your administrators, for example, multiple people that you want to be able to manage VPP or DEP. Those are the differences between the two. But the DEP and VPP portions of Apple Business Manager are exactly the same. So if you're a totally new customer and you want to get up and running just starting with Business Manager, you can. Go ahead and apply business.apple.com instead of deploy.apple.com. I believe you have a way to migrate to Business Manager as well, but I would recommend that you either reach out to our support team for more information or reach out to DEP support prior to upgrading to Business Manager to make sure that that all works how you want it. Cool, next question. Email server setup via Blueprints. Only apply those settings to the default mail app. Excellent question. Yes, so the server settings within the email portion of Blueprints will apply to the native mail app that's available either on iOS or macOS. You do have the ability to deploy the Outlook app, for example, but that will require some setup in the app itself. Cool. Next question here. If the iPad will only be used for preloaded apps, do I have to disable most of the restrictions? That's completely up to you. So it just depends on what all the boundaries are that you want to set for the end user. So it's up to you if you want to restrict specific usage, but I'd say take a look at the list of restrictions to make sure you know exactly which restriction does, because some do really change the functionality of that device. So I'd encourage you to take a look. If you have additional questions, our support team is there to help. The next question here is, what is the cost to use Jamf Now? So Jamf Now is actually free to try. You get 3 devices to enroll for free forever, so you'll never get charged. Once you reach that 4th device, it is $2 per device per month. So whatever that cost ends up being, that's what it'll be per month. You can also buy a yearly license if that's your preference. I'd encourage you to reach out to your vendor, whoever you purchase your Apple devices from, to see if they're able to sell you Jamf Now licenses. Cool, I just got to this message that said that the audio was breaking up a little bit. That's my apologies there. Hopefully that fixed itself. And again, we'll be sending out the recording of this session. So be sure hopefully that audio still comes through. We've got a few more questions here. I know that, that we've got a couple of other questions coming through, so we're working through them. So it sounds like you're having trouble enrolling a reseller device, that you have their reseller ID, and then when trying to enroll, it said it couldn't assign devices. Yes, that's an unfortunate situation to be in. The only thing that I can recommend is that your reseller or your carrier has not made that device DEP capable yet. So I would check in with your business rep over at that reseller or that carrier to ensure that that specific serial number has been made DEP capable. Cool. All right, I'm going to move over to our chat section here. I know we've got a couple of other in the Q&A section, so let me just get through some of the ones in our chat section to make sure that, that we get through everything. So let's take a look here. Ooh, all right, maybe not. Hold on, I'm just getting a couple of other ones coming through. So here we go. All right, it sounds like some folks have had that issue where they're creating Apple IDs for each device. Hopefully today's webinar has helped you understand the value of VPP and how it makes things a lot easier. The next question that came through here is, do devices have to be new to get them into Jamf Now? Absolutely not. You can enroll any device as long as they're compatible. That operating system does need to be a certain version. I think it's iOS 8 or higher. It might be 10.10 on the Mac, but that's available at support.jamfnow.com. But you can use open enrollment for any device that's not new. Cool. It looks like we answered the default mail app question, so that's good. So for those of you that are on here that might be a consultant and are looking for partnerships into how you can sell Jamf or offer Jamf to clients, I'd encourage you to head to jamf.com/partners. We have an excellent affiliate program that can help you gain some commissions on that. So I'd encourage you to look through that. And then you can always reach out to our support team. They can get you in touch with me if you have any additional questions around that. I will leave my email up here on the screen for any consultants that are interested in our affiliates program. General questions about Jamf Now, I'd encourage you to continue leveraging our support team for those questions. Cool. Next thing, I'd like to know if managed Apple IDs are necessary in a K through 12 school, in particular for staff and teachers. That is an excellent question. So Apple School Manager offers some other options like managed Apple IDs, for example, which they've implemented in Apple Business Manager. So in theory, managed Apple IDs are not necessary. You know, some folks like to leverage Apple School Manager features like shared iPad. That's typically where the managed Apple ID scenario comes in, where you want, you know, multiple kids to be able to use the same iPad. That's where that comes in. We should connect offline a little bit more if you want to talk about Apple School Manager and managed Apple IDs. If it's okay with you, I'm going to go ahead and send you an email after we're done here so we can chat a little bit further. Hopefully that's okay. Now, a next question here is, what are the major differences between Now and Pro? And that is such a loaded question. I think as of today, some of the major differences are if you're leveraging Active Directory services, for example, or if you have complex or strict security requirements or compliances where you need to offer auditing reporting, for example. Those are some of the key differences, right? Some things that we think of the enterprise needing, like single sign-on or additional trust certificates, where it gets really into the weeds of IT. For us, you know, we think of it as now it's really meant for simple use, right? What takes 1 or 2 clicks in Jamf Now might take 4 to 5 clicks in Jamf Pro, just because it's so customizable. And so for those of you that do want to take a look at the differences, you can head to jamf.com/products. It'll give you a nice breakdown as to what the differences are. Cool, moving right along. Thank you all so much for your questions. This has been an excellent webinar. Next question here is, how hard is it to transfer from one MDM solution to another? That is such a great question. You know, the most important thing that you have to think of is you do have to rebuild all of your profiles, for example. So whatever you have in your other MDM solution, you'll need to kind of rebuild in Jamf Now if you want to move over. And then the other hardest part about it is that you have to unenroll from that previous MDM to re-enroll into Jamf. And so depending on how you enroll them, if it's open enroll, then it's just a simple, you know, remove this profile and add a new one. If it's DEP capable devices, then we'll have to wipe those iPads clean to get them into Jamf Now. So if you have additional questions on that, I'd of course encourage you to reach out to our support team so they can walk you through some of those steps. But it is essentially an unenroll and re-enroll process. Cool. Next thing is, how many devices would you have until you would go with the full version? And can you easily convert from Jamf Now to Jamf Pro? Is what I think that you're asking. So interesting enough, Jamf Pro, just so you all know, has a minimum device count of 50. So if you're under 50, very much obviously Jamf Now is probably going to be a better fit for now. The one thing I'd say is I don't think you'd want to think about it as to how many devices you have, right? We've got people managing hundreds of devices in Jamf Now. So I think it just depends on what all you want to be able to do. Right. Once we get to the point of talking about the different feature sets, then, you know, maybe it makes sense for you to move over to Jamf Pro. But if Jamf Now fits your needs and you don't need any other advanced features, then you can absolutely stay with Jamf Now, excuse me. In terms of converting, again, it will be a move over. So we'll remove your devices from Jamf Now and add them into Jamf Pro. Keep in mind that Jamf Pro does have an onboarding that is required. So during that onboarding is where we offer that sort of migration. We also offer migration services. So if you want someone to help you through that, that's another thing that we can offer. That's a bit more of a longer conversation. So if you do want to have that conversation, just let us know, and we'd be happy to introduce you to the Pro team. That way they can walk you through some of that. Cool. Next few questions here. It looks like we've answered some of these. Ooh, if we are using Microsoft Intune for MDM, is there an integration with Jamf and Microsoft Intune? What an excellent question. The short answer to that is yes. We do have a partnership with Microsoft currently. That integration that you're talking about is referred to as conditional access. That is only available in the Jamf Pro solution. So if you want to chat a little bit more with our sales team, I'd encourage you to head over to jamf.com. There's a live chat section as well, and then you can also request a trial or anything like that to get in touch. But yes, there is an integration with Microsoft Intune. Sweet. Can we push out an antivirus or firewall for each of the devices to protect them? That's a bit of a loaded question as well. You know, the way that the iOS and the macOS platforms were built, they're already super secure. So if you want to add an additional piece of software, at the moment, we don't have the ability to push custom software, which is technically what antivirus would be considered. It is a custom software. So if that's something that you would want to push out to your Mac, for example, that would be more of a Jamf Pro conversation right now. As for iOS, like I said, you know, iOS is super secure. So all of those kind of firewalls and antiviruses are already kind of built into the solution. So it just depends. Again, something that our teams can walk you through if you want to dive a little bit deeper into some of that, but that is specifically a Jamf Pro thing. Is there a number that we can call at Jamf for additional support? So as of right now, if you're leveraging the Jamf Now solution, email and chat support are going to be the best ways to get in touch with our teams. If you are leveraging Jamf Pro, there are some support options available to you through our premium services and additional support. But at the moment, email and live chat are going to be the ones to help you through that. Cool. The last thing I'd say on that is if you do need additional help, for example, maybe from an IT consultant, you can always head to consultants.apple.com or marketplace.jamf.com to see if there's someone in your area that might be able to help. Cool. It looks like we got a few other things coming through, so we're working through these. If you're interested in taking a look at webinars or additional webinars, that's available at support.jamfnow.com. If you click resources, it'll give you the full list of webinars available. Let's see. So what are the advantages of using Jamf Now versus the Apple Business Management software? I'm so glad that you brought that up. Apple Business Manager is totally useless without an MDM. So you do need an MDM provider to leverage Apple Business Services. So I'd say that that's the advantage there. DEP and BPP really can't do anything unless you've linked them to an MDM. So hopefully that answers your question. Next question is, how do I edit the open enrollment end date? You would have to uncheck the box, hit save, and then check the box again so it lets you edit that end date. Cool. Perfect. Somebody says I sound a little bit like Ellen DeGeneres. I'll take it. Next question here is Apple Business Manager free? Yes, it is completely free to use. DEP and BPP are free portions. The only other thing that you need to think about is the MDM provider. So Jamf is at $2 per device per month. Cool. A few other questions coming through here. When setting restrictions via blueprints, do they work on macOS? If so, will users with local admin rights be able to override the restrictions? Excellent question. When you take a look at the list of restrictions in blueprints, the little gray text underneath each restriction will tell you if they're compatible for macOS. So there are a few restrictions in there that do work on macOS, and they do apply across the entire Mac. So the user should not be able to override those restrictions when they come through in an MDM profile. I'd encourage you to chat with our live chat support team to see if they have any other best practices for you so they can walk you through that. Next question, you mentioned that it is better to have the iPad still in the box. Am I better off factory resetting all of the devices? The open enrollment link did not work for my devices. Is that normal? So that is a little bit of a loaded question as well. It depends on what happened with that open enrollment link. Now, when I mention keeping the iPads in the box, that's usually only for DEP. So if you have DEP-enabled devices, keep them in the box, because if you configure them and then you add them to Jamf Now, you'll have to wipe them clean. Jake, I'd encourage you to reach out to our support team. They should be able to walk you through whatever issues you might be experiencing. But sometimes the open enrollment link, if you didn't copy it correctly, obviously will not work. Or sometimes you have something like a profile installation failed. Sometimes that happens if your Wi-Fi drops off or so forth. I'd encourage you to just try again. Typically that profile is able to come back on. But yeah, please reach out to the support team. They can definitely walk you through that. Again, is Apple Business Manager free? Yes, totally. Is there any available training? Ooh, in different countries. So interesting, we are a global organization, so we do have training in where we have offices. And when I say training, this is specific to our Jamf Pro solution. If you're looking for training on Jamf Now, I just encourage you to continue looking at our webinars page so that you can learn a little bit more. But if you're looking for Jamf Pro training, you can head to jamf.com/training and it'll show you that. Cool, we're still working through some questions and I see that you guys are still coming through with those questions. I'm working through the Q&A side right now, so I'll get right back to the chat in just a moment. But the next question here is, will the device need to be wiped if it was used before being enrolled into Jamf? Excellent question. That is only for DEP devices. So if you have a device that's already there and it's not DEP, you can use open enrollment. But if you want to activate the supervision portion of it, you will have to wipe the device clean after you've imported all of your devices under the DEP devices section. Hopefully that makes sense. Where is my email listed? All right, so keep in mind, folks, that this is for anyone that has questions about our consulting or reseller options, as well as our affiliate program. For those of you that need support, again, I'm not the expert on that, so I'd encourage you to reach out to our support team, either via live chat or email. But here's my email for those of you that are consultants and want to learn a little bit more about that. You're welcome to shoot me a quick email. All right, next question here. Is there a way to print your blueprints for others to know what restrictions the blueprint has or can have? Ooh, that is quite a loaded question. What I'd say is if you want people to see what types of restrictions are possible, you can send them to the demo portal that we were using earlier, and I'm going to type it in here so you have it. It's just login.jamfcloud.com/demo. That will at least let you run through those restrictions. And I'm actually just going to exit my keynote here because I have a few things that I want to share with you all. So bear with me just one moment. Here are all the websites we discussed today. That last one is where the list of restrictions lives, so you can always share that out. The last thing I'd say is if a user wants to see what sort of restrictions is on a device, they can head to General, Settings rather than General, and then Device Management. And those restrictions are outlined for you here. If you click more detail, if you click restrictions, it'll show you. So hopefully that helps. Cool, a couple of other questions. Thanks for hanging in there, guys. Is it worth having separate blueprints for Macs and iPhones due to the different apps which are available? Excellent question. So yes, I would recommend keeping separate apps. That way you don't have to kind of sift through which restrictions are macOS and iOS only. And to your point, you wouldn't want to add multiple different types of apps. Now, you mentioned Word for Mac as well as Word for iPhone. Apple's Worldwide Developer Conference in June, they did mention that Microsoft Office apps are coming to the App Store, so you will be able to deploy them with Jamf Now through VPP when it's made available. But yes, to your point, two apps are different, so I would keep them in separate blueprints just to keep yourself sane as you go through changes. Cool, last question here. Is there any special pricing for education in Jamf Pro? Yes, there is. I'd encourage you to reach out to our live chat team at jamf.com so they can tell you a little bit more about that. All right, we've had a couple of questions come in on the chat side, so I just want to make sure. You mentioned the openness of one's wireless network in order for remote management to work properly. Can you provide a link to Jamf's best practices when it comes to wireless network configuration? That's a great question. We have a article that shows which ports you should be using for, or at least keep open for communication with Apple. One thing I'd say is worst case scenario, if you connect your devices to a mobile hotspot during that initial setup, that will most likely work. But you can type in Jamf Nation port communication in your Google search, and it'll show you those ports that are exactly network ports used. These are the ones used in Jamf Pro, but many of them are similar in Jamf Now. That'll be my recommendation there. And then worst case scenario, a mobile hotspot will get you to the place you need to be. Cool. Next thing here is, why is it important to enroll in VPP and VEP with an email not already associated to an Apple ID? The reason for that is that's the rule Apple has set. They just want you to create an email and an Apple ID that will only be used for deployment programs. If you try to add in another email that's already associated with an Apple ID, it might let you get to a certain point, but it'll give you the error that says this Apple ID cannot be used with Apple Business Manager, for example. So those are some things that you might run into. And the next question is, doesn't enrolling in VPP, DEP create new Apple IDs anyway? No. So the Apple ID that you use to log in to deploy.apple.com, you will never use on a device. If you're deploying apps to a device, there's no need to create Apple IDs per device, so that's not necessary. When we talk about Apple IDs in deploy.apple.com or business.apple.com, those are simply logins to those programs. So if you have multiple administrators, you can then kind of dictate how they use that. But yeah, it's weird because, you know, the Apple ID function is used in the consumer side as well as the business side, so it can get a little tricky. Ooh, next question here, do you see Microsoft Intune for Education as a major competitor? And do you have a comparison document available? The way we see it, you know, Jamf is dedicated to managing Apple devices and helping you manage them in the best way possible, right? We offer zero-day support. We focus all of our efforts on the native Apple experience. The last thing I'd say, too, is that we implement a lot of the newest features that come with new Apple releases. And so some other mobile device platforms are late to the game. The thing I'd say, or for you to think about, if you want to manage your Apple devices, use Jamf. For everything else, use Microsoft Intune. They're going to be the experts in all of those other platforms, and we're going to be the experts on the Apple platform. So I'd say a hybrid of the two is probably where it'll get you to the best place. In terms of a comparison, I'm not sure, but I'd encourage you to reach out to our live chat team at jamf.com. They can probably help you work through some of those differences. All right, it looks like we've gotten to the end of the questions here. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I'm going to hang tight a few more minutes for those of you that have any additional questions. But, you know, from us here at Jamf to all of you, we really, really appreciate you guys taking the time to join us today. I hope that you found today's webinar interesting and useful. And if you want to join us for another one, you can always do so from support.jamfnow.com. Les, I think you're the one that I'm going to be following up with via email. So I'm going to go ahead and do that once we hop off here to make sure that you got what you need. But thank you all so much. I hope everyone enjoys their weekend. Please go into Jamf Now, set up your devices so that you can be successful with your deployment moving forward. And our support team is always here to help. So please feel free to reach out to us. But again, I'll hang tight for just a few more minutes to see if anyone has any additional questions. Other than that, have a great weekend, everyone.